Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books, coming to you from this strange new world of sheltering at home. I haven't posted a video in a week, partly because I've done so little reading, or at least so little reading of real books. I've spent entirely too much time reading the news and constantly refreshing the Hopkins dashboard. And my solitary days working at home have changed now that my college-age son and his international girlfriend have joined our household, and my spouse, a healthcare policy specialist, has begun teleworking. As an introvert, I loved the idea of social distancing, but I had no idea it would include so much togetherness. In preparation for the viral apocalypse, I've been amassing jigsaw puzzles and board games, books and yarn, bread flour and vegetables, beer and wine, etc. We searched high and low for toilet paper in our local stores and eventually ordered a few rolls from Amazon. Now that we have more people sleeping under this roof, I also ordered a new firm mattress to replace the sagging one in my son's old bedroom. Now things are starting to settle in a bit, and I hope I can turn my brain back to books soon. Given my lack of reading, I've been planning to present a couple of book hauls, the large number of books I checked out at my local public library before they shuttered their doors, as well as a couple I found in little free libraries throughout my town before the shutdown really started to happen here in Washington, D.C. Those book hauls will happen soon, but for today I thought I'd participate in the venerable tradition of Tag Tuesday. I'm quite behind on responding, but today I'll be answering the lovely questions of the How Do You tag. Sean D. Standfast put it together, and Steve Donahue was kind enough to tag me. The first question is, do you read more than one book at a time? If yes, what are you reading? And do you read one book at a certain time of day and another at another time of day? I'm a fairly monogamous reader, although I do make some exceptions. It isn't unusual for me to be working my way through both a novel and a work of nonfiction. Sometimes I might be listening to an audiobook as well, when I'm walking to the grocery store or trying to clean up my study or cooking. And there are a few occasions when I'll add in another novel, something short and contemporary if I'm reading a long classic, for example. Or perhaps I'll pick up a book of essays occasionally while I'm plowing through a dense academic text. But I tend to stick to one or two books in general. The second question is, how do you organize your library? Parts of my library are wonderfully organized, but I'm afraid other parts are just stacks on the floor. My family just acquired a couple of new tall bookcases, and I hope they'll help a bit with the piles. Where I do have them organized, I group things roughly by chronology and place. Knitting books are together, as are popular histories. Academic histories live together, as do literary biographies. Novels from 20th century America are shelved next to each other, and novels from 19th century England are in another spot. All the old homeschooling books are stuffed into the basement, still waiting for me to give them away, and all my current teaching books are piled up next to my desk. The next question. Do you ever get the urge to reorganize your library in a different way? For the books that are organized properly on the shelves, I'm quite happy. For the stacks throughout the rest of the house, I would love for them to be more organized. It's definitely on my project list, especially now that my study needs to be available for the young people in our house to use for online classes this spring and for writing their junior theses for college. Question 4. Who's your favorite small or finer press publisher? I really love academic presses, and I'm especially fond of the University of North Carolina Press. Most of you, I assume, don't read a lot of academic Southern history, but UNC Press is one of the strongest publishers in the United States for that topic. Let me mention a couple of favorites they published. First is Like a Family, The Making of a Southern Cotton Mill World by Jacqueline Hall and several other scholars. The book is definitely one of my favorite works and one I recommend if you have any interest in the U.S. in the 20th century, in labor history, or in oral history, or even if you're just interested in how groups of scholars can put together a seamless narrative. Next is Glenda Gilmore's powerful book, Gender and Jim Crow, Women and the Politics of White Supremacy, a beautifully argued and beautifully written study of the role of Black women activists in North Carolina in the early 20th century, including how they forged ties with white women to unite a Southern progressive movement. Lastly, Patricia Sullivan's Days of Hope, Race and Democracy in the New South. This book also talks about the creation of a cross-racial alliance, this one in the 1930s and 40s, seeking to create a radical alternative to Southern conservatism, an alliance of white liberals and Black activists, labor organizers, and Communist Party workers. Both the movement of the first 2 decades and the movement of the next 2 decades promised real hope for increased political participation and justice, but both movements were eventually crushed, partly because of the suspicion of radical politics that developed during the World Wars and then again during the Cold War. So if you're a fan of Southern history, or actually Southern studies as a whole, UNC Press is an excellent place to look for new and old reads. The next question. Can you recall every book you have in your library? Or are there books you find on your shelves that seem to have just shown up? Given how disorganized some of my library is, I'm a little surprised to say that I very rarely am surprised to find books that have just shown up. It does happen occasionally, although usually they're books that were gifts to my husband or son that I've forgotten about until I run across them at some point. More frequently, I think I might own a book, but when I actually think back carefully, I realize that was just a book from the library, a book I returned long ago. The last question is, do you collect bookmarks? I guess the answer depends on what one means by the word collect. I definitely accumulate bookmarks. Here are the ones currently on my desk. A ticket stub from less than 2 weeks ago, when the world was still open. Another from the book depository. And one from Persephone that came with their catalog once. Downstairs there are a zillion bookmarks, ticket stubs or library giveaways, or bookmarks found in used volumes. Not uncommonly, I use flyers that come in the mail from lawn services or house painters or whatever. Back in the day, I made a couple of bookmarks for friends, cross-stitched with their names or with flowers or geometric patterns. An old high school friend recently sent me a photograph of his current book, and sticking out of the top was a bookmark I'd stitched in the early 1980s. It made my day to think he still uses it all these years later. But honestly, I prefer the flimsy paper kind. When I was studying for comprehensive exams in grad school, I often used a 5x7 lined note card for each book I was reading, and I kept summaries and notes for each book on that bookmark. Even now, I often scribble quotes or just page numbers sometimes on my bookmarks. So, no real collecting, but definitely a lot of accumulating. These questions from Sean D. Standfast are really nice. Thanks for tagging me, Steve. If you haven't done it yet, I'd really love to see your answers. I'll officially tag Alba at Seriella, Roz at Scally Dandling About the Books, and Sean the Book Maniac. And thanks to all of you for joining me today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.